And what are some of the habits that you have found, successful people have commonly adopted?
Well, the one that I've just really been harping on lately is
Hmm.
the thing about having a clear vision of your destination, the life that you actually want. You have to almost create a script of your ideal, perfect future life, and then understand that there are multiple ways, and this is where my research really becomes valuable. There are multiple ways to accumulate wealth. It's not just, you don't have to be as Elon Musk, or be some frugal to the point of saving every penny. There are numerous ways. There's four ways primarily, which we'll talk about, that you can accumulate wealth. So, but it all starts with a vision. Where do you want to be, say 20 years from now or 30 years from now? And then slot yourself into the right wealth path. I think what happens is too many people will say, "Oh, I want to be an entrepreneur because entrepreneurs make the most money." They did in my study, and that seems to be the case. Look at Elon Musk; he's the wealthiest entrepreneur on the planet.
Right.
Um, you look at that and say, "I'm going to be an entrepreneur," but guess what? You're a saver investor because your personality profile is that of a saver investor. So now you go off on the path of becoming an entrepreneur, but you're not suited for that path. You
Right.
might not be suited for the path of a big company climber. You might not be suited for the path of a virtuoso. So you have to find out what your personality profile is, and understand what the personality profile is for each of the paths, and then kind of understand exactly if you fit in. And that's why when I was done creating this research, when analyzing this data for years, and I came up with this four paths, I actually created a test so you could take that would tell you whether or not you're a saver investor, a virtuoso, a big company climber, or a dreamer entrepreneur. So I think it's critical. That's number one. Number
Excuse me,
two,
Tom, where can we find this test? I'd love to take it.
I have it on my website. It's one of the articles I've written.
Hmm.
So if anyone wants it, I'll send it to you, and you can send it to them.
Awesome.
It's basically, I try to keep it as user friendly as possible. So
Yeah.
it's Excel based. You just have to answer the questions yes or no, right?
That's
That's it.
wonderful. I just want to make sure we don't skip this part. This is so key. You spent years doing this research, but essentially what you're saying is you've done the homework on hundreds of millionaires and you studied their life to come up with four buckets of how these folks generally achieve their success. And what you're saying is make sure if you're trying to achieve success that you ride one of those trains and not deviate too much from their paths. Is that right?
That's right. And as a real life example is, I had this dream of becoming like a big company climber. I wanted to be like the CEO or the CFO of a big company, and I achieved that.
Yep.
But what I didn't realize was I wasn't suited for that path because I can't handle the politics, meaning I hate the backstabbing.
Yeah.
And people that you think are your friends or your coworkers, and you go out and have a couple of beers with them, and the next thing you know, they're trying to undermine you.
Hmm.
I didn't like that part of the big company climber. So when I created this test, guess who was the first one to take it? I was.
Yep.
And what came up was I was number one, an entrepreneur, number two, a virtuoso, and number three, a big company climber. And way, way, way down on, was the saver investor. I'm just not a saver investor. That's because of the way I was raised.
Yeah.
It's not good that I'm not, but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm a real life example of following the wrong path for about 15 years.
So what's crazy about this to me is you can be successful and you can be wealthy, but the key is to know yourself enough and to leverage Tom's research to basically go on the path of one of these. But let me just ask you, so uh dreamer. So is there any hope for a dreamer? How does a dreamer find success? That seemed like the crazy uh bit of luck to be a dreamer.
Yeah, the dreamer. What sets the dreamers apart from every other path is they are the ones that have an incredible amount of passion. And the other thing is they have an enormous high risk tolerance. They will get divorced before they give up on their dream. So not everybody would be willing to do that, right? So you have to understand yourself, know thyself, right?
Right.
So if you know, if like I am that type of person, I would do anything to pursue my dream. And it's not even something I have any control over. The passion consumes me to the point of obsession. What CPA in the world would spend 5 years doing a study on rich people and poor people with no potentially income coming out of it? I had no idea that it could be monetized. I was just in pursuit of the truth.
Yeah.
And so, you have to have that obsession as an entrepreneur. But the interesting thing is, if you do fit into that slot, the entrepreneurs in my study had the most net worth, 7.4 million on average, and they got there in the shortest period of time, 12 years. Compare that to the saver investors, who had about a $3.3 million net worth, and it took them 32 years to get there.
Right. But is it accurate, Tom, to say that the saver investor is the more accessible path for most people? And yes, the rewards are not as high, but is also the most kind of likely path of success?
Yeah, the beautiful thing about the saver investor path is it doesn't require any unique set of skills, no expert knowledge. You don't have to work egregious hours. You don't have to put everything on the line, including your family and your friends. All it takes really is managing your standard of living so that you could save 20% or more of your income, of your net income. Now, a lot of the saver investors started out at 10% in my study. They started out at 10%, then they upped it to 20%. And as they got towards the later part of their lives, that went up to as much as 40%. So it's not a static number, 20%,
Right.
it's got to be 20%.
Right.
No, it changes because, and that's why I wrote Effortless Wealth, which is all about the saver investors. There are stages in your life that allow you to save 40%, and there are stages that prohibit you from saving even 10%. So, but the point is, you have to get into the habit of saving if you're a saver investor, and continue to save even when you're only saving 5, 6, 7, 8%. And then when you have the opportunity presents itself, you can increase that. And that's really why us saver investors are, I call it the effortless path to wealth, because all you have to do is live not a frugal lifestyle. You do have to be frugal, but you have to live a lifestyle that you're comfortable with, but that also allows you to save.
And that's the great news, because we're not virtuosos. Most of us are not. Would you describe Michael Jordan as a classic virtuoso?
Yeah, he's what I would describe as a skill-based virtuoso. There's knowledge-based virtuosos out there. I think Elon Musk is a great example of an entrepreneur who is also a virtuoso.
And a dreamer, going to Mars.
That's the important thing too. I'm glad I brought that up, because many of the individuals who were big company climbers and virtuosos were also saver investors. Right. And many of the entrepreneurs, once they attained success, meaning once they had enough cash flow and they weren't living paycheck to paycheck, if they were even receiving a paycheck, once they had enough cash flow, they became saver investors.
That's right. So does that tie into a little bit of the rich habits? Like, what are your top 3 rich habits of wealthy people?
Yeah, the first thing, and it's rich habit number 1 for a reason, is self-awareness. You can't change. You can't go from point A to point B, point A being where you are and point B where you want to go, without self-awareness. You have to be self-aware of the habits that you have and how many of them are good, how many of them are bad. So that's number 1, self-awareness. Number 2 is I found that the wealthy I think it was 88% read 30 minutes or more every day to learn, not for entertainment. They read to learn. Now, 30 minutes was the minimum, but many of them had, 2-3 hours of reading every day. And I
Yes.
read somewhere, I didn't read somewhere, I helped write an article for Business Insider way back when on Warren Buffett, and that guy
Yes.
reads like 3 or 4 hours a day.
And so does Bill Gates.
Yep. And Elon Musk, when he was a kid, he read 10 hours a day.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that about the wealthy, the self-made wealthy, is that they're voracious readers. They're intensely curious, and this is more of a trait
Hmm.
than a habit.
Right.
If you're not a curious person, and most humans are, it's hardwired into our DNA to be curious. So it's an anomaly for anyone who's not a curious person. So most human beings are curious. You just have to make a habit out of the moment that you have some type of curiosity. You write what I do, because I'm too busy. I'm juggling like 4 balls.
Yeah.
I write down. I keep a pad of paper next to me, and I write down something that pops into my head out of nowhere.
Mm.
And it could be something bizarre, like how long would it take a rocket to get to Centauri B, right?
Right.
I'll write that down, and then in the morning I do all of my research, and that's included in my research. I try and answer some of the questions that I pose to myself during the course of the day. So curiosity is a habit, but you have to write down the thing that is making you curious, and then in the morning is the best time to do any technical reading, any of the kind of reading that the self-made millionaires do, because as you're waking up, you're still between alpha and theta and beta. You're kind of in this zone
Yeah.
where you're not quite asleep, you're not quite awake, and the interesting part of that zone is that your subconscious mind and your conscious mind are communicating. That's what happens when
Wow.
you sleep. So you want your conscious and your subconscious mind to be working, and your subconscious, because it's active, it's going to overwhelm the conscious mind because it's more powerful, and you're not going to get the neocortex to say, "Hey, stop reading. This is boring me." It takes about a half an hour before you start getting that message from your prefrontal cortex.
Wow. So self-awareness, which you can get by taking your little quiz on which of the four kind of wealth habits suit you the best, wealth paths, and then the reading habit, which we all know is so powerful, just voracious consumption of knowledge. What is the third rich habit?
So aerobic exercise. This caught me off guard
Wow.
because I grew up. We were rich and then we were poor, and I was very
Yeah.
young when we became poor. So I only really knew poverty, and uh, I hated rich people because all of the conversations that I was having with my mother
Yeah.
was about how wealth is evil, and she had some Bible saying. She would say it's easier for a camel to pass through a needle than it is for a wealthy person to enter the kingdom of God. And she must have said that 100 times when I was a
Wow.
kid. And so I grew up thinking wealthy people were evil.
Mm.
What I found out was, oh my God, they're the opposite of evil. And I also grew up thinking they were fat, smoked cigars, and they were lazy.
Yes.
What I found out from my research is that somewhere close to 80% of the self-made millionaires exercised aerobically uh, 3 to 4 days.
80%.
80% exercised aerobically. I think it's 80% exercised aerobically 3 to 4 days a week. Now,
Wow.
this is a rabbit hole,
Yeah.
Panera, because when I started researching this, trying to understand why, what I found out was aerobic exercise actually makes increases your IQ. It
Hmm.
makes your brain smarter. It makes it bigger. It makes the myelin sheath around the axons of the neuron thicker, and that means that increases the speed of the electrical message that's being fired down the
Wow.
axon. They say Einstein had very thick myelin sheath around his axons of his neurons. So they were exercising aerobically, feeding their brain with oxygen, which the more oxygen you have, the more mitochondria are
Yes.
created within each cell, and the more mitochondria, the more you can process glucose into ATP, which is the fuel source for all the cells in our body. And that means your brain is getting more nutrition, more energy, and the brain cells are getting stronger. The neurons are growing, the axons are growing, the myelin sheath is growing, everything is getting bigger. So these self-made millionaires might have started out with 100 IQ, but they finished up with 130 IQ.
Wow.
Because their brains just from point A to point B became a completely different brain, rewired and grown. More gray matter, which is the dendrites. So that's that's what was a shocker to me. The other thing is,
But believable, right? The
yeah, it
startup
makes
founders
sense,
you
doesn't
hear
it?
about, they wake up at 5 and they work out for an hour every day. You do kind of hear that
Yeah.
habit.
Yeah, and there's a reason, and maybe, and honestly, the self-made millionaires in my study, there was one that understood this, and he was 67 years old, and I said to him, he had about $17 million, and I said to him, why don't you retire, and enjoy the rest of your life, go travel, do all the fun things you wanted to do. And
Yeah.
he looked at me like I was from Mars. He said, wait a minute. He goes, since I was 30 years old, I started exercising every day and eating healthy. And the reason was because I believed it would help me be able to extend my career. And I felt that the last 10 years of my career were going to be my highest earning years. And so he said, I want to continue working to accumulate more wealth. And he said, and the wealth is not for me, it's for my great grandchildren.
Of course.
So
Generational wealth.
So he ended up working another 5 years. I think he retired at 72. And on average, he was making, the last 10 years, he was making about $1 million. In those last 5 years, he made $10 million. So he was exactly spot on. He
Yeah.
made the most money in basically the last 5 years of his working career.
Wow. And so, Tom, tell me a little bit about that time in your life when your family did have some money, and then things fell through, and all of a sudden you were in trouble.
So my dad had a partner. My dad was the brains of the operation, the administrative guy. He was an accountant by trade, and his partner was the salesperson. He was the outgoing, gregarious person that went out and managed all those relationships that are so important to businesses.
Yeah.
And we were very wealthy. We lived on Toad Hill on Staten Island, on 2 acres in a big home, and everything was perfect in our life. And then, out of the blue, my dad's sales partner died of a massive heart attack at age 39. And what my dad did was his company was one of the top tool distributors in the East Coast of the United States. And so he had all of the big names, the Sears and Roebuck. He had all of the big chains. He had controlled that whole corridor with his tool distribution business. And when his sales partner died, he realized, I can't run the business by myself. I'm not a salesman. So he sold the business for $4.5 million back in, I think, 1969.
Yeah.
$4.5 million back then it's about 25 million in today's dollars. So it's pretty good.
Pretty good. Yeah.
He received the first installment. He didn't receive the second or the third installment, and the terms of the agreement were that the company reverted back to my father. And that was a mistake. My father should have walked away, but he didn't. He, unfortunately, as happens with many of us, our ego gets in the way. And he took the business back and he hired someone to be the salesperson. But the thing that happened was, it was an 18-month gap between when he sold the business and he took it back. And when he took the business back, it was a completely different business. And within 30 days of taking the business back, his warehouse was burned to the ground. It was arson. They just don't know who did it. My father knows who did it, but that's another matter, how to prove that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, when my father was starting trying to get the business back up and running, got a new warehouse. He called up all of the tool manufacturers and he said, "Hey, I need some tools." And the manufacturers, one after another, said, "Bill, um, you still owe us for the tools that burnt up." Now, my father said, "That's impossible. We always paid COD
Yeah.
for our tools." And he said, "Well, the new owners didn't. They
Oh
went
my goodness.
on 60 to 90 days credit."
Wow.
And so what my dad did is at the time he had about $5 million. He had about $3 million. That's what he said, 3 million. He took two and a half million, and he paid off all of the vendors, the manufacturers. And I asked him years later when he was
Did the
old,
right thing and went broke as a result.
he did the right thing and went broken. And I asked him years later why he did that, why he didn't just bankrupt the company. He said, "Well, if I did that, then about 15 of the manufacturers would have gone bankrupt." And he said
Wow.
those manufacturers had families,
Wow.
and I knew a lot of them. I knew their families, and he
Yeah.
said it just wasn't right. It wasn't the right thing to do. So
Yeah.
he bankrupted us in order to save them.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so, Tom, that gets to the heart of why you did what you did and why you're passionate about this. I think, what is your message to folks that aspire to be wealthy someday and aren't and are maybe
Well,
even poor?
the good news that I found is that there's more than one way to become wealthy, and it's good news because everybody has different personalities, and there's because there's four primary paths to wealth. You can be an introvert and become a saver investor or a virtuoso. You can be one of these people that never shuts up, and you could become, a top salesperson in a company or an entrepreneur. You could be somewhere in the middle and climb the company ladder. So there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, right? There's no one size fits all in becoming wealthy, and that is a good thing. I think that's the most important thing. And I think besides the rich habits, finding out what they were, and the poor habits, I think the understanding the four paths to wealth are probably my greatest achievement in my research.